Welcome to Stories Junction. Let's begin today's story. I don't think I'll ever forget the day my life fell apart. It was supposed to be a celebration, our 15th wedding anniversary. 15 years of love, commitment, and building a life together. I had spent weeks planning the perfect evening, something special, something unforgettable, and it was just not in the way I had imagined. Let me take you back to the beginning. Happy anniversary, sweetheart, I murmured as I leaned over Evelyn's sleeping form, pressing a soft kiss to her cheek. She stirred slightly, her dark hair spilling over her pillow, a sleepy smile tugging at her lips. You too, Adam, she mumbled, voice thick with sleep. 15 years feels like a lifetime. I chuckled, brushing her hair back gently. And I love you more now than ever. She opened her eyes just a fraction, giving me a lazy smile before stretching her arms above her head. But something about her expression caught me off guard. She looked distant. A flicker of something unreadable passed through her gaze before she quickly turned onto her side. I told myself she was just groggy. Maybe it hadn't registered yet that today was a big day. I wasn't going to let my overthinking ruin what I had planned. I'll see you tonight, I said, squeezing her hand. Thinking of taking you somewhere fancy. Just us. She hesitated, just for a second. Then, far too quickly, she said, "Oh, that sounds great, but I have yoga at 5. Could we push it back a bit?" I frowned slightly. Yoga? She never mentioned yoga on Wednesdays. She always went on Mondays and Thursdays. Something didn't sit right. Still, I forced a smile and nodded. No problem. I should be done with work around 7 anyway. Good, she said, rolling back over, her voice still thick with sleep. But there was something else there, too. A slight tremble. A hesitation. I kissed her forehead and got out of bed, but the unease lingered in my gut like a stone. The drive to work was filled with memories of our 15 years together. I thought about the early days, the nervous excitement of our first dates, the way she used to look at me like I was the only person in the world. I thought about our wedding day, how breathtaking she looked walking down the aisle. The moment we found out we were going to be parents for the first time. We had built so much together. Lately, though, things had felt different. Evelyn had been distant, distracted. Some days, she barely even looked at me when I spoke. I had chalked it up to stress. Maybe work had been getting to her, or she was just exhausted from managing the house and kids. We all go through phases, right? But today, something felt off. At the office, I could hardly concentrate. I kept glancing at the clock, waiting for time to pass so I could execute my plan. I wanted tonight to be perfect. Instead of taking Evelyn to dinner, I decided to make things more personal. I would leave work early, pick up her favorite flowers, grab a bottle of the same wine we had on our first date, and cook her favorite meal at home. The kids were already staying with my sister for the night, so it would be just us. No distractions. Just like it used to be. I could already picture the look on her face when she walked in. Surprised, maybe a little flustered, but ultimately touched. I wanted to remind her of what we had, of why we fell in love in the first place. This was going to fix everything. Or so I thought. At 4:30 p.m., I clocked out, heart hammering with anticipation as I drove home. The bouquet of white lilies, her favorite, sat on the passenger seat beside me, along with the small velvet box containing the necklace I had spent hours picking out. As I turned onto our street, I noticed it immediately. A car. A sleek black sedan I didn't recognize, parked directly in front of our house. I slowed down, my brows knitting together. Maybe it was a neighbor's visitor or a delivery, but something didn't feel right. I pulled into the driveway, eyes lingering on the unfamiliar vehicle. The windows were tinted, making it impossible to see inside. My pulse quickened. Brushing off the unease, I grabbed the flowers in the small box and headed inside. The moment I stepped through the front door, I knew something was wrong. The house was silent. Too silent. Evelyn was always playing music when she was home alone. Even when she was reading, she kept a playlist on in the background. The quiet was unnatural, almost suffocating. I set the flowers and the gifts down on the kitchen counter, trying to shake the growing unease. Maybe she had stepped out. Maybe she left early for yoga. Then I heard it. Muffled voices, coming from upstairs. I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The voices were hushed, barely above whispers. I strained my ears, trying to make out the words, but the sound was muffled by the walls and the distance. Then came a soft laughter. Not just any laughter. Hers. A sound I had once lived for. A sound that used to be mine. Except now, she wasn't laughing with me. A low murmur followed. And then, a moan. A sound that punched me square in the gut, knocking the air from my lungs. My heart pounded, my hands turning to ice. No, it couldn't be. Every rational thought in my mind screamed at me to turn around, to walk away, to not go up those stairs. But my feet were already moving. I climbed the staircase slowly, each step feeling like an eternity. The voices grew clearer. More laughter, more moans. My fingers curled into fists. My throat went dry. I reached the bedroom door. It was slightly ajar. My breath came in shallow, uneven gasps as I lifted a shaking hand and nudged the door open, just enough to see inside. And then, in an instant, everything shattered. That's the end of part 1. Let me know when you're ready for part 2. I stood frozen at the threshold of our bedroom, my mind racing, my chest tightening with every breath I tried to take. The image in front of me was more than I could process, more than I ever thought I would have to witness. There she was, Evelyn, my wife of 15 years, tangled in the sheets with another man. It didn't make sense. I couldn't make sense of it. The betrayal, the lies, it was like a fog had settled over my brain, blurring everything, distorting reality. I took a step back, my mind struggling to comprehend what I had just seen. The silence in the house felt suffocating, pressing down on me as I tried to steady myself. My hands were shaking, and my heart was a wild drum in my chest. I didn't know how long I stood there. Seconds? Minutes? It felt like hours. But my feet didn't move. I couldn't look away. I couldn't unsee what I had just walked in on. Suddenly, Evelyn's voice cut through the thick silence. "Adam," she said, her voice strained, almost panicked. "What are you doing here?" The man beside her, his face, his nakedness, it all blurred together. I couldn't even process who he was. All I knew was that he was in my bed, in my home, with my wife. And I stood there at the door, helpless and furious all at once. Her voice broke through my haze again. "Adam, please don't. Don't." I couldn't stand there any longer, rooted to the spot, helplessly watching. My legs moved without thinking, my body pushing forward as if the air had gone thick with rage. I opened the door wider, stepping inside. The door slammed against the wall with a sound that shook me to my core. Both of them froze. Evelyn's eyes met mine, wide with shock, her face pale, her lips trembling. She scrambled to cover herself with the sheets, but it didn't matter. The damage was already done. I'd seen everything I needed to see. "Brian, what the hell are you doing here?" she stammered, the words tumbling out in a frantic rush. It wasn't her surprise that hit me hardest. It was the look in her eyes. Fear, panic, guilt, but no remorse, no shame, just fear. Fear of being caught, fear of losing everything. I didn't know who this woman was anymore. "Who's this?" I said, my voice cold, venomous. "How long has this been going on, Evelyn?" She opened her mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. She just stared at me, tears welling up in her eyes, but her face was more guilty than anything else. I could hear my own breath coming in short, sharp gasps, my hands trembling as I pulled out my phone. I had to record this. I couldn't walk away without proof. I needed to know that when I looked back, I could hold onto the reality of what was happening. But I couldn't stop myself. My feet moved, faster this time, and I charged into the room. "Adam, stop!" she cried, her voice cracking. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Not with everything we had, everything I thought we had, destroyed in an instant. The man next to her finally moved, climbing out of bed and grabbing for his clothes, his face blank, irritated even. He didn't look scared. He didn't look like a man who had just been caught betraying another man. I wasn't going to let him walk out of here. "Where do you think you're going?" I spat, moving quickly to block his path. My heart was pounding, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I could feel my entire body shaking, but I was too far gone, too angry. The man stopped in his tracks, his face still unreadable, but I wasn't about to let him walk away without consequences. I grabbed him by the collar and shoved him back. The man staggered, his eyes wide with surprise, but he didn't get the chance to react. Not fast enough. With all the force I could muster, I drove my fist into his jaw. The sickening crack echoed through the room. He fell back on the bed, his face contorted in pain, and I stood over him, my breath heavy and ragged. Evelyn screamed, her voice sharp with fear. "Brian, stop. What the hell is wrong with you?" she yelled, but her words didn't reach me. I didn't care anymore. I wasn't going to stand there and let him walk away like this was some bad dream. I grabbed him by his shirt again, shaking him violently. "You think you can just walk out of here like nothing happened? You think this is okay?" His face twisted with pain, but I didn't stop. I shoved him out of the room, down the hallway, forcing him toward the front door. His hands were shaking as he fumbled with the door, desperate to escape. He glanced back at me, his eyes wide with fear, but it didn't matter. I wasn't going to let this man, this stranger, think he could just leave without facing the consequences. "Get out," I shouted, my voice hoarse with rage. He didn't say another word. He bolted out the door, getting into his car without looking back. I stood in the doorway, watching him, feeling every ounce of fury coursing through my veins. The tires screeched as he sped off down the street. I was still shaking, still feeling the adrenaline flooding through me, but the anger wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I turned back to the room, to Evelyn. I didn't want to look at her, but I had no choice. Evelyn was standing there, wrapped in the sheets, her face pale with a mix of shame and panic. Her lips trembled, but no words came out. The silence between us felt like an abyss, deep and suffocating. My fists were still clenched at my sides, my body still buzzing with the raw energy of what had just happened. I had just caught her in the most humiliating act of betrayal, and I was left standing there, empty inside. My mind was still reeling. I couldn't believe it. Evelyn, my Evelyn, had done this to me. I had been married to her for 15 years, built a life together, raised 2 beautiful children, and she had betrayed me in the worst way imaginable. On our anniversary, no less. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat, but it never left my mouth. The weight of what I had just seen, what I had just heard, crushed any trace of humor in me. "Why?" I finally managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper, hoarse with disbelief. "How could you do this to me?" Evelyn looked down at the floor, her hands trembling as she clutched the sheets tighter around her body. I could see the tears welling up in her eyes, but I wasn't sure if it was guilt or fear that brought them on. She had the nerve to cry now, after everything. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this," she said, her voice broken, barely above a whisper. The words felt like a slap. "Oh, so this was just an accident? I wasn't supposed to find out, is that it?" "No, that's not what I meant," she pleaded, her voice shaking now. "I'm sorry, Adam. I never wanted you to find out this way. It just happened. I couldn't hold back anymore. I had to know. How long has it been going on? How long have you been lying to me? How long have you been sleeping with him behind my back?" She flinched at the question, her hands covering her face as if she could hide the guilt etched into her very soul. "I wasn't thinking, Adam," she said softly, the words barely making it out. "I was lonely. You were always working late. You were never home. And when you were, it felt like you weren't even here. I needed someone to listen to me. I needed someone to care. I could feel the rage bubbling up inside me again. Lonely? You thought that was a reason to cheat? To destroy everything we built together?" My voice rose, cracking with emotion. "How could you even justify that?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she sat there, her face in her hands, as if the weight of her own betrayal was finally catching up with her. "I never wanted to hurt you, Adam. I never wanted to ruin our marriage. But when Josh came into my life, I thought he was different. He listened. He understood me. And I felt like I mattered again." "Josh," I repeated, my voice cold. "So now he has a name? Great. So what? He just swooped in while I was trying to provide for our family? While I was working to keep us afloat? Please, Adam, don't." She reached out for me, but I stepped back, my heart too heavy with betrayal to accept her touch. "You don't get to ask for sympathy, Evelyn." I spat, my voice bitter and sharp. "You don't get to sit there and tell me you felt neglected after everything I've done for this family. I worked my ass off for us, for you. And this is how you repay me." Tears were flowing freely down her face now, but it didn't make a difference. I wasn't going to be fooled by her tears anymore. I had seen enough. The lies, the deceit. It had all culminated in this moment, and there was nothing she could say that would take away the hurt. The damage was done. I was so lonely, she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never wanted this. I never thought it would go this far. It just happened." I clenched my jaw, the anger rising once more. "You think I don't know what that feels like? You think I don't feel the same way sometimes? But I didn't go and sleep with someone else. I didn't betray you. You could have come to me, Evelyn. You could have talked to me. But you chose him. Over me. Over everything we had." She shook her head, the sobs racking her body. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Adam. Please, I never wanted to lose you. But it was too late for apologies. Too late for excuses. Then why didn't you stop?" I demanded. "Why didn't you think about what this would do to our family? To our kids?" The mention of our children struck a chord. Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands again. I could hear her muffled sobs, but all I could feel was the deep well of betrayal that had taken root in my chest. I took a deep breath, the anger and sadness still fighting for dominance inside me. "You didn't think about them, did you? You didn't care that this would destroy them too? That your selfishness would tear apart the family we worked so hard to build?" "I'm sorry, Adam," she whispered, but the words felt empty. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I turned away, unable to listen to her anymore. I couldn't stand the sound of her voice, the way she tried to justify what she'd done. I had loved her. I had given everything for her and for our family, and she had thrown it all away for someone else. "I'm done," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "I can't do this anymore. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." The room felt suffocating. I couldn't stand being there, not with Evelyn still crying in the bed, her voice choked with remorse and desperation. I had made my decision, but the pain of actually following through was like a weight pressing down on my chest. I didn't even look back as I grabbed a bag from the closet and hastily packed a few clothes. It felt robotic, like I was going through the motions, numb to the reality that I was leaving everything I had ever known. 15 years of marriage. 15 years of memories, of promises, of vows, shattered in an instant. I felt the sting of tears behind my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I couldn't. As I zipped up the bag and slung it over my shoulder, I glanced over at Evelyn. She was sitting on the edge of the bed now, her face tear-streaked, her shoulders hunched in shame. She opened her mouth to say something, but I couldn't hear her anymore. My mind was deafened by the sound of my own heartbreak. "Adam," she whispered, her voice so fragile. Please don't go. We can fix this. We can work it out. I love you." The words hit me like a physical blow. Love. She had loved me, she said, but it hadn't stopped her from making the choice to betray me. It hadn't stopped her from falling into someone else's arms while I was working myself to exhaustion. "I can't," I muttered, my throat tight. I was lying to myself, trying to convince myself that leaving was the right thing. But deep down, I knew there was no going back. The trust was gone. I didn't want to look at her anymore. I didn't want to hear her voice or see the desperation in her eyes. I had given her so many chances to make things right, to come clean, but she had kept lying to me. She had betrayed me in the worst way possible, and now she was begging for a second chance. I turned and walked toward the door, my heart pounding with the finality of it all. But just as I was about to leave, a small voice from the hallway stopped me in my tracks. "Dad!" I froze. My breath caught in my throat. It was Ava, my daughter. She had been playing with her brother in the living room just moments before, unaware of the storm that had just torn our lives apart. I couldn't look at her. Not like this. Not with everything that had just happened. She stood there, eyes wide, her small face full of confusion. She was only 8 years old, but in that moment I saw a maturity in her that shouldn't have been there. She could sense that something was wrong. "Dad?" she asked again, stepping into the room, her small hands fidgeting nervously with the hem of her shirt. "Where are you going?" I felt a lump rise in my throat, the guilt and the heartbreak hitting me all over again. I couldn't do this to her. I couldn't make her suffer through this. She didn't deserve to see her parents torn apart like this. I'm just going to take a walk for a bit, sweetie, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but it cracked on the last word. Ava stared up at me, her eyes searching my face, trying to understand what was happening. Is everything okay? She asked, her voice trembling. I had to fight the tears that were threatening to fall. I couldn't break in front of her. Not now. Not when I had already lost so much. Yeah, honey, I said, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Everything's fine. I'll be back soon, okay? She nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. The uncertainty. The questions she didn't know how to ask. I kneeled down to her level, trying to keep my voice calm. I'll be back. I just need some time to think. Her lips quivered as she wrapped her arms around my neck. It was a tight hug, the kind only a child could give, full of love and innocence. It felt like a weight on my heart, a reminder of everything I was about to lose. I love you, Dad, she whispered, her words full of a child's pure love. I love you too, Ava, I whispered back, my voice thick with emotion. I kissed her on the forehead, feeling the sting of tears I couldn't allow myself to shed. After one last look at my daughter, I turned and left the house, my heart heavy with guilt and regret. I had just walked away from the woman I had loved for so long. But in that moment, as I walked down the driveway, I realized I was also walking away from everything I'd worked for, the family, the life I had once dreamed of. I got in my car and drove, not sure where I was going, only knowing that I couldn't stay there. Not with her, not with what had just happened. The roads blurred as I drove, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The anger, the heartbreak, the betrayal, it all rushed through me in waves. Eventually, I found myself at my mother's house. I didn't want to go there. I didn't want to face her, not with everything that had just unfolded, but I had nowhere else to turn. I parked the car in the driveway, but before I could get out, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Evelyn. I stared at the screen for a moment, the temptation to pick up gnawing at me, but I couldn't. I couldn't hear her voice. Not right now. I stepped out of the car and walked into my mother's house, the door creaking as I opened it. My mom was sitting in the living room, flipping through a magazine, but when she saw me, her expression changed from casual to concerned. Adam, she asked, her voice soft. What's going on? What happened? I could feel the floodgates opening, the dam of emotion that had been holding back for so long finally starting to break. I need to talk, I said, my voice cracking. I couldn't keep it together anymore. I sank into the chair across from my mom, my heart still heavy with the weight of the day. Her concerned gaze softened as she took in the state I was in, disheveled, exhausted, and broken. I had hoped to be stronger, but there was no hiding the destruction that had just shattered my life. Adam, she said softly, her voice warm with a kind of understanding only a mother could offer, you're home. You don't have to explain everything all at once. Just breathe. I nodded, taking a shaky breath as I looked down at my hands. I could still feel the sting of the slap against my heart, the image of Evelyn and Josh together forever etched in my mind. How'd I gotten here? How had everything I'd worked so hard for, everything I thought I had, slipped through my fingers so easily? I caught her. I whispered, my voice barely audible, as if saying the words out loud would make them more real. Caught her with him, on our anniversary. The words tasted bitter as they left my lips, and I quickly looked away, not wanting to see the pity in my mother's eyes. Oh, honey, she murmured, moving closer to me. She placed a gentle hand on my arm, offering what little comfort she could. I can't imagine the pain you're feeling right now, but you don't have to carry it alone. I let out a shaky breath, the tears I'd been holding back threatening to break free, but I clenched my fists, willing myself to stay composed. There was no going back now. The choice had been made, and the road ahead, though painful, was my only option. I never thought she could do this to me. I muttered, my voice rough with emotion. 15 years, Mom. 15 years of memories, of everything we built together, gone. Just like that. And now I'm left with nothing. Sweetheart, she said, her voice soft but firm. You've got yourself. You've got your children. You have your integrity, and most importantly, you have the ability to rebuild. I looked up at her, eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and bitterness. Rebuild? How do I rebuild after something like this? How do I move on after the one person I trusted the most betrayed me like this? You start with today, she replied, her voice gentle but full of wisdom. You're not going to forget what happened, but you can choose to move forward, to heal. And you can't do that if you keep holding on to the past. The silence between us stretched for a moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air. I wasn't sure I was ready to let go of the hurt just yet, but I had to try. For my kids. For myself. I know you're angry, Adam, my mom continued, and you have every right to be. But don't let that anger consume you. You have to find peace. And you have to make sure you're there for Ava and Ethan, too. They need you now more than ever. I nodded slowly, taking in her words. The kids. They had no idea what was happening, no clue that their world was about to change in ways they couldn't understand. The guilt of having to explain this to them, of tearing apart their little world, was already eating away at me. But I had to do it. For them. They couldn't grow up thinking their father was weak or defeated. They needed to know they were still loved, no matter what. I'll talk to them, I said, though the thought made my stomach twist. I just don't know how to explain this. How do I tell them their mom and dad won't be together anymore? My mom gave me a soft smile, though there was sadness in her eyes. You'll find the right words. You'll tell them the truth, but you'll reassure them that you'll always be there for them. No matter what. They'll be okay, Adam. I didn't feel as though I could give them that reassurance just yet. My heart was still too raw, still too broken. But my mom was right. I would have to be strong for them. For Ava and Ethan. They deserve that much. They deserve to know that even though their world was crumbling, their father would still stand tall beside them, helping them rebuild. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow, I said finally, the words leaving my mouth with a finality I had been avoiding all evening. I can't stay with her. I can't keep pretending everything's fine when it's not. I've tried, but I can't forgive her. Not this. My mom didn't say anything at first, but I could see the sadness in her eyes. It was the same sadness she had carried when I had gotten married to Evelyn all those years ago. She had never been completely sure about her, and now, it seemed, that intuition had been right all along. I'll help you through it, she said quietly. You don't have to do it alone. We sat together for a while, and I began to feel the heaviness of the day slowly ease away. My mind wasn't at peace, but at least for a few moments, I felt something resembling clarity. I had a long road ahead of me, but I wasn't facing it alone. I had my family, and I had my resolve. I had to rebuild for me, for my children, and for the man I used to be, the one who had been betrayed but still held on to hope. And somehow, I would find my way forward.